Hello, thank you very much for joining me today on this business to business customer journey mapping session. So today should last about 30 minutes, and I'd just like to say thank you very much to the Digital Cities Festival for giving me this opportunity. So let me introduce myself. I'm Phil. I'm the lead UX designer here at DEPT UK. I've got about 15 years experience in customer journey mapping, UX research and design. I've got a good experience in conversion rate optimization as well, and trying to solve business problems as well as customer problems. I've had some really great experience over the last few years working with the likes of Triumph Motorcycles, Ascot Racecourse, Omron and Fujitsu, to name just a few of our clients. So the agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about DEPT to start with, and then we'll look at the customer journey mapping exercise in its entirety. Then we'll kind of go into the three-step process of business-to-business customer journey mapping. How to run discovery, how to do in-depth customer research, and then finally visualizing that journey. So a little bit about DEPT to start with. Don't worry, we'll be quick. We are a digital agency for creativity, technology, and data. We are here to help accelerate and build our clients' businesses. And there are around 1,700 digital thinkers and makers across Europe and America. So that's about 13 countries and 28 different offices. We're a full service agency, so that means we offer brand and strategy, customer experience, products and platforms, as well as marketing and performance data. We do this for a whole range of clients. Some are the multinationals that you can see here. But we also like to work with local heroes as well. So we've got a broad range of experience, and you can find out more at deptagency.com. So with that, I think we'll just jump into the customer journey mapping, and I'll give you an overview of what that is. So customer journey mapping is a strategy used to understand where in the customer lifecycle users may have good or bad experiences. So what we try and do is we try and visualize this process by focusing on specific users with specific scenarios who are trying to achieve a certain goal. And with these insights that we gather, we try and map them along a certain journey, and we look at the different stages a user might take within each of these stages. We'll look for the behaviors and their strengths and the weaknesses, and we'll plot these on a visual graph to show us where these highlights are and where the lowlights are. So these are obviously going to give us really great insight into how our users are interacting with our business, but also they're going to show us opportunities for improvement. These opportunities will allow us to increase market share, increase customer retention and loyalty. So there are lots of benefits to running customer journey mapping exercises like these. And we use a variety of research techniques as well to gather this data. So we want to build as much of a thorough picture as possible. And we've got a really detailed map at the end of this, and we can understand what our users are doing in a real granular detail. So quick warning here, there is a Venn diagram coming up. It wouldn't be a presentation without one. So what we try and look for here is qualitative and quantitative insights and marrying the two together. And where this overlap happens, I believe this is really where the magic happens, because what we're looking for is these weak points and drop-off points within the journey. So by looking at quantitative insights, like for instance from Google Analytics, we might see that users are dropping off at certain stages or bounce rates are high. And to understand why this is, we have to go and speak to our customers, and that's where the qualitative insights come. So by running in-depth research with our customers, so this could be a survey or a poll, or more one-to-one research like an interview or user testing, this will really help us identify these weak points, not only what happens, but why it happens as well. So once you've identified those weaker points, that allows us then to start building a roadmap of improvements that will obviously improve the business. However, this is where it starts to get a little bit complicated, because customer journey mapping for businesses isn't as easy as consumer customer journey mapping. So I've got a quick diagram here just to show you that in a typical customer journey map, we'll maybe look at manufacturing business process, and then how does that affect the customer journey. So the customer may go on different stages, both online and offline. They may speak to salespeople or go phone up a call center. So there might be different touch points that happen not just digitally, but offline as well. And we want to map those as thoroughly as possible for that customer journey. Over the last 12 months, we've seen a bit of a change in behavior here as well, with businesses having to close and shut down their retail facilities due to the pandemic. We can see that there's been a shift in behavior, not only from consumers, but from manufacturers, who are now offering a more direct-to-consumer product as well. And so there's been huge radical digital transformation for some of these companies that's happened over the last 12 months. For business-to-business customer journey mapping, it starts to get really complicated when we look at the distribution models that some businesses have. So you still start with a manufacturing business selling a certain product or service, but then that product then gets maybe passed on to a distribution network or suppliers. They might then pass it on to localized retail or original equipment manufacturers, and then the product may get passed on to end customers or consumers. So what we're trying to understand here is the relationship between the business, the distributors, the retail, and the end users. So we really have to get in depth with the research. So trying to do this is a really complicated process, but we've broken it down into a 3-stage simple process. And we always start any process with discovery. So discovery, we want to start running a series of workshops internally and get a base level understanding of the business and how it operates. So we want to flush out all the different key details from each department within the business so we get an understanding. What we really want to understand is how each department interacts with its customers. Are they customer facing? Are they behind the scenes with customer support? We really want to try and understand the roles and responsibilities, the tools, the technology that support that customer experience. And we can categorize these people into front of house and back of house, who's there speaking to customers and who's supporting them. So I've got a quick tip for you here if you're in this type of workshop internally. And this is using the Team Canvas framework. So Team Canvas is essentially a quick workshop that you can run internally, trying to understand the value proposition that your teams deliver, the key jobs that they do on a daily basis. So you may have things that people do on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly basis, the tools and systems that they use to interact with their customers and support the customers, and the KPIs that they're measured against. So by running these types of workshops, we can start to understand maybe the pains and the opportunities that are prevalent within the industry itself, and how this then has a knock-on effect to the external processes. So by focusing on that internal infrastructure, how does that fuel and engage with the customers outside of the business? Finally, going through this process, we really want to try and identify the types of customers that people are dealing with. So there's a really useful part of the business model canvas that we can use to identify the types of customers. So the business model canvas is a large, complex framework that we can use to identify gaps in the business or identify opportunities within the business. And just by using these 2 segments in the top right-hand corner, we've got customer segments and customer relationships. So breaking down these customers into different areas. So going back to our diagram that we had before, we could think about them as OEMs, distributors, suppliers, merchants, retail, There's lots of different customer segments in there. And then there's the relationships that we have with them. Are we direct communication with them, or do we rely on third parties to interact with them? Is there a loyalty scheme, for instance? Those are really useful scenarios to bring out this workshop, so we can start to identify the key touch points for our customers. So once we've done this workshop, we can start to then break this down into a customer life cycle, breaking these touch points down into a journey. And this journey is really going to start the foundation of our customer journey map. We can look at maybe the 5 segments of the customer journey, so everything from awareness to consideration, through to acquisition and conversion, all the way through to loyalty and retention. So within these key stages, there may be some micro steps that happen within this. So how are people becoming aware? Is it online? Is it offline? And what are the channels people are becoming aware of? Do you use social much? Is it direct mail? Is it email? Is it calls? So many different channels we can start to identify here. And we want to map them all out so we get a really good understanding of these steps a customer has to take. So another tip here for you. This is a lesson well learned, I think, because we've really dealt with a lot of customers in the past, and we've maybe underestimated how big a customer base can be. So my third tip here is don't underestimate how diverse your business-to-business customer base is. So once we've identified the different groups of customers, so distributors, suppliers, installers, engineers, end users, we need to understand the different levels and roles and responsibilities within these industries as well. So you can be speaking to C-suite, who might have the final decision on whether that contract gets purchased, or you could be dealing with engineering, who are boots on the ground, dealing with your product on a daily basis. And these people will have very different needs. So really understanding how customers interact with your business across each of these touch points and what the behaviors and motivations are is key to the research. So moving on to step 2, conducting this research. We want to make it as in-depth as possible. So we need to make sure that we've got enough research and enough data from our customers that we find patterns of behavior. So there's a standard rule that we kind of use within UX, and this comes from the Nielsen-Norman group, that 80% of problems can be found by just testing 5 users. Now that seems quite few, but actually when we start to break it down, we're thinking about these demographics and these types of people that are involved in the research. So there's an example here of how we might break down that customer recruitment. So we're not just going to speak to 5 people, but we're going to speak to 5 people in these different areas. So merchants, specifiers, installers, retailers, homeowners. And if you think about that product life cycle, you could give your product to a merchant who would then pass it on to an installer who would then maybe fit it in a homeowner. So there's lots of different stages the product may go through. And we want to speak to each and every person and make sure we've built up enough of a picture and enough understanding how these people deal with your process, the stages within the customer journey, and also the products themselves. So this is where we start to look at the interactions within the customer journey. So before I talked about micro journeys within the stages, and here we can see an example of maybe a customer being referred and searching for a product, researching and comparing it, visiting a website and interacting with some sales staff or online chat, for instance, then eventually purchasing, going through a delivery, maybe they're having to return it, and then would they recommend it? So lots of different micro journeys that happen along the way. And when we're speaking to our customers as well, we really want to try and get an understanding of how they're interacting with us. So let's ask all of the people we're speaking to about each and every one of these stages. Even if they're not involved in these processes, they might have some secondhand knowledge within their organization or within their business that helps them make a decision in the future. So C-suite, for instance, might not get involved with a returns process, but they might hear within the logistics team that actually returns is a real problem for the business. It's costing them money, so they're going to move away from your business in the future. So this is going to help us identify these opportunities and weak points. So when we're doing the research, I think it's really important, going back to the diagram, that qualitative research influences the overall research that we're bringing together. And there's 4 different techniques that I've put together here to help you go through this research phase. First one here is empathy mapping. And empathy mapping is really great to start with when we're conducting these interviews, to really start to map out and relate to our customers. So they may say something, but then do something else. And they may think something should be a certain way, but then feel something different about a process. So by just kind of categorizing these out as we're going through the research, this really starts to help us put together a profile and a persona of these types of customers. The second one here is a diary study. So diary studies are a really great ethnographic research strategy that we can implement to understand how users interact with your business across each of the steps. And it's very much a natural way to observe a participant in their natural environment. So tools we've used in the past are things like email and WhatsApp. We've essentially befriended customers and we send them a text message every couple of days to figure out if they've interacted with the business. So have they spoken to sales? Have they been onto the website? Have they had to return a product? And mapping them over a certain amount of time, we really start to understand this online, offline behavior, as well as frequency, how many times they interact with the business as well. The third one here is user testing. And a firm favorite of mine, because we get to not only interview and interact with customers, but we get to observe their behavior online. So again, within business-to-business customer journey mapping, there may be tools and processes and systems that we just don't get access to. And by running this type of research, we can really understand some of the pains and frustrations people go through internally using internal systems. So we can ask them to go through a series of scenarios where we can identify some of those opportunities. So this could be implementing new digital strategies, new tools, new processes, and this is really going to help us ease that customer lifespan and life cycle. Finally is analytics and Hotjar. So again, going back to our Venn diagram here, we're thinking more around the quantitative research now. How many people are actually visiting our website? Where are those drop-off points? And by using screen recording tools like Hotjar and heat mapping, we can start to see what is interesting to our customers and what isn't interesting. And again, move us through to those problem areas that we can identify and hopefully increase engagement with our digital products. So there's a lot of research there, and by the end of it, it could feel quite overwhelming. So how do we bring it all together and how do we visualize this? Well, to start, I would say we focus on the people. We bring the personas back and we really narrow them down. So to create a persona, we want to start with their backstory, their motivations, their behaviors, their characteristics, emotional responses, daily routines, and all of this research that we've gathered from running the diary studies, the interviews, the empathy mapping. We should be able to create a really good picture of the types of people that we've identified. However, business-to-business customer journey mapping isn't as simple. We've got another layer here that we have to deal with. So what is the professional footprint? I talked before about roles and responsibilities, and where do these people sit within the organization? How big is their organization? How do they fit into the business? What touch points do they have? And what influences do they have as well? So we've got an example here of a customer profile, and it's essentially a persona, but with a more emphasis and focus on the functional aspect of the persona. So we've got on the left-hand side, we can see a simple backstory and characteristic, the typical day, and the do's and don'ts. We have the emotional responses as well, so the motivations, the behaviours, the frustrations that we should have identified in the research, and we can document them here. But the biggest part of this is the functional aspect. So what type of business are they in? What sector? What size? The scale? The turnover? And then what is their role in the decision making? Are they a gatekeeper, or are they an influencer? Are they a decision maker within this process? And what actually drives them to your business? Let's find out that information and get it noted down here. And also the touch points, going back to that digital, non-digital. We need to understand how they're interacting with the business as well. So once we've created these personas, it's time to move on to plotting them against the user journey map. So here's an example of a customer journey map across the stages that we identified earlier and the steps that the user takes, as well as the customer experience touch points. And by identifying the user and the tools, the technology, the data, the departments that interact with these people, we can really start to build a picture of how these people engage with the business and whether they're having a positive or a negative experience in these areas. So by identifying the weakest points, we can now attribute these weakest points back to a particular tool, a particular piece of data, a particular interaction, or even a particular department responsible for that experience. So this is really going to help us start to build a roadmap of improvements. And here's an example of some customer journey maps that we produced last year for a large automation business. As you can see, they are very in-depth, they are very complicated. However, when we start to zone in on certain areas, we can start to see where these personas exist. So within each of these maps, we had to identify that there was essentially 3 different industries within this organization. And within each of the industries, there was actually 3 types of personas that we found. So by focusing on each person and documenting the interactions and the processes, the tools, the technology, we were enabled to pull out a score, essentially an experience score that we can map across the different stages. And I think what started to get really interesting as we pulled this together was when we started to compare and contrast these scores against one another. And we started to see a pattern emerge. So you can see here that the lowest experience scores are all the same across each industry. And this is really great validation that there is something wrong in these parts of the journey. And not only that, this is highlighting the roadmap for us essentially. This is showing us, this is compounding the fact that if we improve this one journey for one user group, it's going to have a knock-on effect to the rest of the experience for the other user groups as well. So when we're trying to create a business case for improving a specific area, we use these types of heat maps and experience maps to show where we should start. So by improving these areas, we're ultimately going to become more customer-centric. We're listening to our customers. We're going to hopefully increase loyalty and retention. And we're going to create a more personalized experience for these types of people. And all of this hopefully relates to building your business, driving growth and increasing market share. So that's a kind of a whirlwind example of how customer experience mapping can help improve your business. Hopefully you've learned a few different tips today. I'd just like to say thank you very much for the opportunity. And if you do have any questions, I'll be around to answer them in the chat, or you can get in touch directly. So thank you very much.